Okay. So hi, everyone. Today we're going to be talking and exploring social issues and really kind of trying to answer the question, how can I make a difference in the community? So my name is Aurora Shunk. I'm the Assistant Director in the Civic and Community Engagement Office here on campus. We're located in South Wing 130. And today I have two community partners to Buffalo State Campus. Sierra Johnston, class of 2011. She's the volunteer coordinator at Jewish Family Services of Buffalo and Erie County. And Marco Notaro, he is the community outreach director for the Niagara area Habitat for Humanity. So before we get into the questions that I have with our two panelists, I just want to quickly introduce them a little bit more. So Sierra, she is the volunteer coordinator, as I mentioned, and she really coordinates all aspects of the Jewish Family Services experiences for volunteers, service learning students, and interns, as well as in-kind donations and assisting with community outreach and special events. And Marco, he is really responsible for overseeing all programming with the Niagara area Habitat for Humanity, including the volunteer experiences, community outreach, marketing, and then family support programs. So welcome and thank you to the two of you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
So the first question that I have is, tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at your organization. And Sierra, maybe you can go first.
Sure. So as Aurora mentioned, my name is Sierra Johnston. I am the volunteer coordinator at Jewish Family Service of Buffalo and Erie County. And she did talk a little bit about my role there. I coordinate all of the volunteer internship and service learning experiences, as well as doing a lot with donations and community outreach. So about my organization, we do a lot of different things. JFS is a multifaceted human services organization. So we're probably best known for our community services. So those include Refugee Resettlement, Jewish Community Care, our Center for Survivors of Torture, career and employment services, and our parenting program. So a lot of different things going on there. But we also have a mental health clinic and both adult and children's health homes.
Marco, how about you?
Sure. So as Aurora mentioned, my name is Marco Notaro. I'm the Community Outreach Director with Niagara Area Habitat for Humanity. So that is the Habitat for Humanity affiliate in Niagara Falls, New York. Our service area is all of Niagara County, but we build primarily in the city of Niagara Falls. Habitat for Humanity worldwide has built more than 800,000 homes. We are one small piece of that. Since 1993, we've built 29 homes here in Niagara County. We're getting ready to break ground on our 30th home once we're able to start building again, once things kind of ease up from this whole COVID-19 situation. And what Habitat's model is all about is really helping families access affordable home ownership. And how we do that is by building and rehabilitating homes. And then we provide those homes to families through the form of a low interest affordable mortgage. So unlike a traditional mortgage you would get through a bank or a credit union, Habitat caps our mortgages at 30% of a family's income and charges a lower interest rate. Typically it's less than 2% than families would typically pay at a private market, which helps make homeownership more accessible to families who otherwise would not be able to be served by traditional financial institutions.
Thank you. So, you guys both sort of touched on this really briefly, but what are some of the, community priorities or the community issues that your organization impacts directly?
Yeah, so I did mention some of this as I explained the services that we provide, but all of those I think can be broken down a little bit into specific issues. So refugee resettlement, we deal with everything from when they first come to making sure that they can access services, to policy advocacy, and making sure that the laws that are being passed are in favor of our refugee community. So a lot of things going on there. Mental health, of course, we do a lot with trying to get rid of the stigma of mental health. Unemployment, especially right now during COVID-19, we have a lot of clients who are dealing with unemployment. Our career services and employment counselors are there to help them find employment. Jewish community care, part of what we do is responding to acts of anti-Semitism in the community. And then within our Center for Survivors of Torture, there's a lot of advocates for those that are experiencing intimate partner violence and domestic violence. So a lot of different things.
Yeah, and so at Habitat, the priority we really focused on, as I mentioned, was affordable housing. And unfortunately, the communities that we serve suffer from a large lack of affordable housing. So it's advised by many economists and also HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, that families pay no more than 30% of their income towards their housing costs. Beyond that, you typically have to make trade-offs in other vital expenses. But unfortunately, in our area, that many families are forced to make those types of trade-offs. So a study by Mobile Safety Net found that almost 60% of renters in the city of Niagara Falls and almost 55% of renters in the city of Buffalo are housing cost burdened, meaning that they're paying more than 30% of their income towards their housing costs. And among the lowest income renters, that number is more than 75%. And a big reason for this is that here in the state of New York, in the last 20 years, wages have largely been stagnant relative to inflation, while housing costs have increased almost 25% over that same time span. So combine that with steadily growing costs in other vital expenses like healthcare and education, and you have families who are increasingly pinched to make ends meet. And the result is that more and more families locally are squeezed by their housing costs, which reduces their ability to save and forces a lot of them to live paycheck to paycheck with no margin for an unexpected financial emergency. And this also forces families to make trade-offs in terms of their other costs, because if you're only supposed to pay about 30% towards housing and you're paying, let's say, 40%, that extra 10% has to come from somewhere else. And studies by Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Policy has found that families who are housing cost burdened spend on average 40% less on food, 75% less on healthcare, and almost 60% less on transportation, in addition to their fact that they often struggle to save as well. At Habitat, we really believe that no family should have to make the choice between paying for, say, their rent and their groceries, or paying between keeping a roof over their head and being able to afford their insulin. So what our model does is we set our mortgages to make sure that no family pays more than 30%, and we look to serve the most vulnerable families in our region. So every family coming through Habitat is making less than 60% of the area median income, and are families who traditionally would be unable to access affordable homeownership through a bank, credit union, or a traditional financial institution. But the lack of affordable housing is a real struggle here in Western New York, and something that unfortunately impacts an increasing number of families each year.
Definitely. So I know you both have started to talk a little bit more about this in your previous answer, but if you were to dig down a little bit more into one of the priorities or one of the issues that your organization really impacts or is trying to make an impact in the organization, can you tell us a little bit more about what that looks like, talking about any sort of root causes for that issue and why it's prevalent in our community, and really just kind of tell students a little bit more about the background of that issue in any way.
Yeah, so I was going to focus on refugee resettlement, why it's an issue. We have a ton of refugees who resettle in Buffalo every year. Not as many lately, but I'll get it more into that later. So the way that our organization helps with this issue, well, let me back up. So the root causes of the issue, obviously there are people who are fleeing their countries because they do not feel safe, and whether that is due to, the government doesn't allow them to practice their religion, or because they're different in some way. There's all different reasons, but they flee here. And so if they're refugees, then they've done this in a way where they have handled all the legal stuff on the side of their country, and they've come here, and there are refugee agencies that will meet with them and do the legal stuff here. So there's that. We also serve asylum seekers who are a little bit different because they haven't necessarily gone through that process. So our goal instantly becomes starting to help them with the legal stuff once they get here. But as far as our refugees, so our refugee resettlement case managers, they are the ones who, they will greet them at the airport. they get them set up in an apartment before they even arrive here. So the issues really are that, like, we need to help them. We need to help them to assimilate into our society the best way we possibly can, which can be really tough for someone who has just gotten on a plane, has never been, you know, to this country before, knows nothing about our cultural norms or anything like that. So they get here. Our first thing, within the first 90 days, we get them set up in an apartment. I have groups of volunteers who will do that before they arrive. We try and link them with employment. And other services. We do 4 basic cultural orientations, 1 for legal, 1 for their home, just learning how to do little different things that in the way their home functions, and a few other things. And so we get them to the point where they feel comfortable sort of getting started on their, and the goal is that after 90 days, they're able to do all of these things on their own. But we have extended services, and we will provide them with for a longer period of time, because obviously nobody can do all of that in 90 days and become fully comfortable in another country within 90 days. So that's a huge part of it. What was the other part of the question? I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's okay. Yeah, just just if there's any more information about that specific community issue that you want to share about how your organization is impacting it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's pretty much the extent of it, is providing those services and engaging the community and advocating for policy change, which I didn't want to get into just yet because I have more information on that in later questions. But yeah, a huge part of it is advocating for policies that protect our refugees and that enable them to get everything that they need, whether it's advocating for certain policies to be prioritized in the budget or whatever it is that we need to do to make sure that they're getting what they need.
Great, thanks, Sierra. Marco?
So I think for Habitat, it's really about helping families, like I said, access affordable homeownership, because unfortunately in the United States, there's a really negative history of inequitable access to homeownership. And this goes back really to the New Deal when during the Roosevelt administration, we create the FHA, the Federal Housing Administration, and create a government program that's designed to help families access homeownership by offering FHA insurance to banks to insure loans that they would make to families to purchase mortgages. And the idea of this program was that the government would essentially subsidize the risks that banks would take in lending to families who were working class or lower income. And this is a government program we institute in the 1930s, but implement in a way that ended up largely cutting out people of color. So part of this was done through redlining, and part of this was done through guidelines that to qualify for the mortgages, banks had to maintain the existing racial makeup of neighborhoods, which had the effect of preserving essentially segregation. And this policy works between the 1930s and 1968 to do really 2 things. In the white community, it ends up creating a massive housing boom. So the housing boom that you see after the Second World War, the rise of suburbs and the growth of the middle class comes largely because of this policy. But those policies were largely excluded from communities of color. And this has led to a lot of the racial wealth gaps that we see today, a lot of the disparities in homeownership. So the white family homeownership rate is about 70%. For African American families, that's only about 40%. And a lot of this dates to these policy decisions that we made between the 1930s and the 1960s in terms of federal housing policy, which also had created and preserved a lot of the racial and residential segregation we see today. One of the reasons that Buffalo is and remains the 6th most segregated city in the country, and one of the reasons that the Buffalo public schools remain as segregated today as they were in the early 1970s, are the legacy of these types of policies, and which created these large gaps in homeownership and also these large gaps in wealth. So that's, I think, just kind of one example of kind of the historical cause of a lot of these policies that we at Habitat try to counter by making homeownership more accessible in communities and neighborhoods which were historically redlined and neighborhoods which historically did not receive the same type of support.
Great, thank you to both of you for responding to such a complex question and summarizing it really well. I know you both touched on policies in your previous comments too, but is there any way, or what ways rather, do policies impact your organization's efforts and your community members that you serve, today? Or is there any current policies or current legislation that your organization is advocating for or working behind the scenes on?
Yeah, so the policy that's the most prominent for us is the Immigration and Nationality Act, which determines the amount of permanent immigrant visas allocated in the US each year. And that number, unfortunately, has gone down over the past few years. So we typically used to accept about 35,000 in past years. There were about 35,000 refugees who would resettle in the United States. And within the past year, there's only been 18,000. So that, of course, is in part to changes in that policy. So one of the things that we always try and do is get people to help us advocate for support of that policy and of changing that policy to be able to get us to be able to include more refugees in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would say that with housing, yeah, we saw kind of in that last answer I gave kind of one example of, I think, how policy can work well and how bad policy can be devastating, since the policies of the FHA, for example, were designed to increase homeownership for one group of people. And that was an example of a government program that did increase homeownership for the people. It wasn't for the people that the government wanted to make the program accessible to. But the very deliberate decision of who to exclude from that policy also had devastating consequences. And I think a lot of the policy choices we make around housing still affect us. So, for example, some countries, such as the United Kingdom and the Netherlands, have what are known as universal housing voucher systems. So for those who are familiar with programs here like Section 8, this essentially offers vouchers to families which caps their housing costs at 30%. And beyond that, their housing costs are subsidized by the government within a reasonable amount. Now, we offer only a very limited housing voucher system here in the United States, Section 8, but in Buffalo and Niagara Falls, the wait list for those programs tends to be, in some cases, more than 5 years, and the demand for it vastly exceeds the supply. So I think that that's kind of one example of housing decision we haven't made, and how that has led to kind of a shortage of affordable housing. I think that here in Buffalo, you also see, I think, what happens when you don't have policies to try to manage rising rents that come with economic development. So I think that decisions that policymakers can make in terms of inclusionary zoning, in terms of negotiating community benefits agreements with developers to ensure that as economic development happens, which causes a lot of times rent prices to rise and property values to rise, which means property taxes rise as areas become, say, more gentrified, that is done in a way that does not result in people who are living there being essentially priced out of their neighborhoods. And I just add as well that neither Habitat nor Jewish Family Services exist in a vacuum. A lot of economic policies indirectly affect Habitat. So I mentioned earlier how wages have been largely stagnant, even as costs have increased. That ties in part to, I think, policies around, say, the minimum wage, laws which have weakened the power of unions over the last 50 years, and also kind of the failure to constrain other costs, such as healthcare or education. And also policy decisions we made even in terms of public assistance. So we capped welfare payments in 1996 as part of the Clinton-era welfare reform, which has resulted in programs like TANF essentially operating on the same budget today that they operated on almost 25 years ago, even though costs and inflation have reduced the purchasing power of those same programs. So I think a lot of the policy decisions that we make, even if they're not directly related to our own programs or our own areas, indirectly still can affect our organizations.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I'm glad you pointed that out, Marco, that both your and Sierra's organizations, that your work and that issues in the community, although today we're talking specifically about housing and refugee resettlement, that they all kind of exist and mingle together, and that there's not silos or separate structures where these issues don't interact with each other in any way. So thank you for pointing that out. So if you're going to be talking to a Buffalo State student or anyone who's interested in the community about making a difference and impacting social issues or social justice issues, you know, what would you say to them? How can they actually make a difference?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the number one idea for me is always volunteer. We have a ton of awesome volunteer opportunities at JFS, whether it's, you know, a one-time quick opportunity of setting up, well, it's not really quick, it's pretty intricate, but we have awesome groups who do it, but setting up homes for refugees, or if it's coming and being a regular volunteer and helping our case managers out every day or a couple days a week. We have a ton of opportunities for that. And even now within COVID-19, we have a bunch of remote volunteer opportunities that I'd be happy to get more into. If anyone's interested in that, or I'll leave my contact information, they can reach out to me. But jumping into the issues that you feel passionate about and volunteering for them, I think is always number one. But also, you know, there are more things at the macro level that I think students can participate in that maybe they don't realize. Voting is obviously huge. We have an election coming up. Do your research, learn about the people that are running in your area, and find out who shares passions with you, and vote for those people. And also, you know, policy change. We have more control over policy change than we think. So we are constantly asking people to help us out by reaching out to their elected officials and ask them to support different bills and things that will help our clients. I think sometimes people, I know myself, I can get a little bit tripped up if I don't feel like I have the exact details of what I'm asking for when I contact a senator or an assembly person or someone who can help me make a difference within the issue that I'm hoping to change. But if enough of us contact them and write them letters and call them and show up at their offices, things do change. So we are always very transparent about what we're asking people to help us advocate for, who we need them to call, what we need them to say. You can find those things on our social media. Also, it's not just us. As Marco said, we do not exist in a vacuum. I would also highly recommend following all of the refugee services agencies locally on social media. So there's Jewish Family Service, Journey's End, International Institute of Buffalo, and Catholic Charities. Definitely follow all of them. Well, you're not going to have to dig too far to find the information that we need you to project to the community. You know, you'll be able to find it. Just follow us. Most recently, we were having people contact elected officials because we were concerned that the New York State Enhanced Services to Refugees program was not going to make the budget cut. And so we needed people to advocate for that, and we had a great outcome. We had a lot of people out there doing that, because without that, a lot of healthcare benefits would have been cut to our refugee communities, which were especially needed during this time. So that's just an example. But yeah, volunteer, vote, and see how you can help advocate for policy change.
Thank you, Sierra.
Yeah, I'm going to echo a lot of what Sierra said, since she covered a lot of really good things in her answer, I think. So just with Habitat specifically, volunteering is, I think, kind of the primary way I talk about with getting involved with our organization. So with Habitat, because especially our office in Niagara Falls is so small, we only have a staff of 2 people, so half your staff is here speaking to you today. We rely especially on volunteers to help with home construction, to help us complete homes on time and keep our projects on their timetable, which in turn allows us to serve more families each year. So we have a lot of opportunities that are available, just for example, here for clubs on campus, which we're happy to set up for any groups that want to come out, or individuals who want to just volunteer by themselves. If swinging a hammer isn't someone's thing, though, we also try to offer volunteer opportunities to work with people's other skill sets. So if people have a skill set in areas such as marketing, finance, things like that, we can try to have them work on our committees. Or I have some students who have in the past come and worked and helped us with things like marketing, social media, our email newsletter, things that help support and grow the organization, but are just beyond a lot of times the staff capacity of a staff of only 2 people. So that's a really important way I think that students can get involved really directly. But I also think, as Sierra said, advocacy is really important, especially around a lot of these policy issues. We have a ton of capacity especially at the local level, to, I think, affect change. And a lot of times, ironically, unfortunately, local government tends to be the one that people focus on the least, but that's an area I think we can really make more of an impact. And because local and state policy really affects a lot of our organizations. And Sierra started to kind of mention it in her answer, but our our organization, Jewish Family Services, and virtually every nonprofit that does amazing work in the community are reliant on funding from state and local government. And right now, in fact, a lot of that funding is going to be threatened because states are looking at massive budget shortfalls as a result of the loss of revenue that's resulted from the COVID-19 situation, and there are going to be massive cuts unless there is, say, a bailout to state governments, and that is going to have a major downstream effect on a lot of organizations. At Habitat, for example, we receive funding from the state of New York, which helps to subsidize the difference between what a home is worth and what a family can afford. And that allows us to sell homes to families at a rate that's affordable, while also allowing us to continue to build more homes. That funding stream for us is just one funding stream that's going to be in, I think, serious jeopardy as a result of these potential budget shortfalls. So I think advocacy to try to push for programs, push for support for these types of organizations, since increasingly in the last 20 years, a lot of local organizations have seen their funding streams threatened, which weakens and limits their capacity to do the vital work that is needed in the community. So I would say advocacy, being involved, advocacy work is really important. I would say supporting local organizations that do great work. So in housing, that's not just us, but that's organizations like Push Buffalo, Home, Housing Opportunities Made Equal, Open Buffalo, organizations that are doing really good work around the issues of affordable housing, or really whatever cause you are passionate about. There are a lot of issues that are really important that we're dealing with in Western New York that you have the ability to affect change with by being involved, and also voting and actually focusing on and being involved in local issues. So I think those are a couple of different things that students can do if they want to affect more change, because there is a lot of ability to do so at the local level.
Great, thank you to both of you for those suggestions and really thoughtful responses. Before we jumped into the question and answer section, I just wanted to see with either one of you, is there anything else that you want to add related to any of the sort of topics that we covered, or even expand on anything else that you brought up today?
I guess I just always like to throw in to students when I give presentations like this that they have so many different resources, especially at Buff State, like right there. And if there's anything that they're passionate about, that they're interested in getting involved in, maybe that they want to make their career someday or whatever it might be, to reach out to you and Tanya and Laura and people at the, the CCE and their professors as well. Just like you have people at your fingertips that can help you get involved in the social issues you care about. So don't hesitate to ask questions and jump in.
Yeah, and to kind of build on Sierra's point, a lot of the organizations that are doing this type of work need and want your help and support on this.
Yep, even now, we have plenty of stuff for you to do right now.
In the nonprofit community, it's a lot of organizations which are obviously doing more with less and trying to do really good work with limited resources. So any additional support that you're able to get is going to be welcome. And on the issue of housing, I did want to touch on just one consequence of a lack of affordable housing, and that's the high eviction rates that we see in our community and kind of the devastating effects that they have. So I mentioned earlier how families who don't have access to affordable housing pay a higher percentage of their income towards their rent, which gives them less of a safety net if an unexpected economic disruption occurs. So a job loss, a healthcare emergency, unexpected bill, or they're laid off because there's an unexpected global pandemic. The last one, I'm sure, is hard to imagine.
Right.
And what we've seen in the United States is that the overall consequence of this is families face an increased likelihood for eviction or being forced out of their home. And the majority of evictions in the United States are families who are paying more than half of their income towards rent. And this can have a really devastating effect that actually ends up being a cause of a family's economic hardship in some ways. I think we think of eviction as a symptom, but a lot of times it can actually be a cause, because when a family's evicted, it creates difficulty for them finding safe and affordable housing. Anyone's gone, say, apartment hunting, how difficult that can be and how time-consuming that can be when you're doing it with time on your side. Whereas when a family is facing, say, a 5-day eviction because they fall behind on their rent, a lot of times it forces them to settle for housing which might be unsafe or unaffordable, simply to find a roof to stabilize them and have a safe place for their kids. And the high rates of evictions not only limit people's access to future public housing, because eviction can actually be used as a condition which can cause you to be denied for, say, Section 8, but it also leads to an increased likelihood of families becoming homeless, and it also just creates tremendous trauma for families and particularly children.
Mhm.
There have been some psychological studies on it that have found that in the years after, that families who face eviction are twice as likely to suffer from clinical depression. In the immediate aftermath, it's actually considered a significant predictor of suicide. And it actually can cause families to become 15% more likely to actually lose their job because they either miss time at work due to eviction, their performance decreases because of stress, and for kids, it can be very disruptive. Studies on children who move and have to move frequently, which happens when a family becomes evicted, find that each move during childhood has been associated with about half a year of grade loss for kids. So when families have one eviction, it can kind of spiral and lead to multiple ones over the span of a short time. There's a great book by Matthew Desmond actually on this subject. And unfortunately, going back to that question on policy we talked about earlier, we don't have a lot of policies to protect tenants' rights in place. So even though you have a legal right to counsel, even if you can't afford it in criminal matters, the Supreme Court has found that that same right doesn't exist for housing. And the result of this is that in eviction courts, over 90% of families aren't represented by attorneys, where over 90% of landlords are. And in many cases, because families are either ill-equipped to deal with the complex issues of their eviction, or simply can't afford to take time off of work to go down to court on a weekday when maybe they don't have that type of the ability to miss a day of work, that over 70% of evictions are just default judgments because the family doesn't show up. So the lack of protections for tenant rights and the lack of money that we allocate to legal aid for this also causes a lot of tremendous issues. So that's just one thing I wanted to kind of touch on since I didn't get a chance to touch on it earlier.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much to both of you. So we had a couple of questions that came in over Instagram yesterday when we posted about this program. So I just wanted to read off these questions and see if you, either of you can respond to them. So one of the questions was, if you're thinking about a student, you both were college students, so is there a time frame that makes a difference? Whether it's a certain amount of hours every month is how a student can make an impact on an issue, or is it related to either like a one-time volunteer opportunity, or does it need to be every single week? Or do they need to raise a specific amount of money to fundraise for an organization? How can somebody, or how can you quantify making a difference? Is there any sort of threshold that a student would have to meet in order to actually say they've made a difference in the community?
There's always a way. I guess my suggestion would just to be transparent about the time that you have, the time that you're able to put forward, or if there's a certain amount of hours you need, just talk about that in the beginning and we'll make it work. If someone comes to me that only has, the ability to volunteer for 5 hours or for 2 weeks or something short, then I'm going to try and link them with a home setup or something, that a project that's only going to take a couple days. If they need a lot of time, or if they want to volunteer for a long-term opportunity, then I'll bring them in and have them, assist one of our case managers weekly or bi-weekly for an extended amount of months. Whatever it is that they're able to contribute. For me anyways, I prefer to try and tailor the opportunity to what it is that the student is looking for in a way that'll benefit the organization and the student.
Yeah, I think it definitely, that the answer is going to vary by organization and what the volunteer opportunity is. So if you have questions about it, I always advise just reaching out to find out what opportunities are available and what the commitments are. At Habitat, for example, on the construction side, those can be one-time opportunities, or they can be ongoing. So if a group comes to us and says, hey, we want to come out one Saturday for 4 hours, we will make that work, and that is still meaningful and impactful to us. If someone says, I can give you 5-10 hours a week, and I want to come and basically help your marketing committee, that's something we will make work. But I think, kind of like what Sierra said, just be transparent with what you're able to offer, because it's like if someone comes and says, I can only do 2 hours a week, that's still 2 hours that can be impactful. And that's something where I'm, as a person who does, manages volunteers, I'm happy to work with that. And if I know going in what your commitment is, and what you're able to give, I can work within that that framework to help set something up. I think just being kind of transparent about what you're able to offer, and then the organizations, I think, are going to be able to work within whatever you can do. But I'd say that even if you feel like, oh, I'm not going to be able to get a lot done, I can only offer a few hours a week, it still makes a difference. So I would say don't let that stop you or discourage you from getting involved if these issues matter to you.
Great. And then the other question that came in from Instagram is, especially right now during COVID-19, a lot of students are aware that most, not all, but a lot of in-person volunteer opportunities aren't available. So how can students be impactful and make a difference during this time, either with your organizations or in general?
Mm-hmm. First off, I just want to say that yes, a lot of agencies have suspended their in-person volunteer opportunities, but do not let that stop you from seeking volunteer opportunities. Our local nonprofits still need you. We still need volunteers. We still need students. We still need service learning students. We still need our service learning offices. We need all of you. As for right now, yes, we have suspended our in-person volunteer opportunities, but I have a whole long list of remote volunteer opportunities that I am looking for people to help me with right now, including arranging grocery delivery to clients who are isolated, checking in with our clients, making phone calls, writing letters, especially to our senior citizen clients. A lot of our Holocaust survivors are really in need of support right now. Our low-income families within our health homes and our other programs, we're looking to assist them in any ways that they need. And we've received funding to do this. So we're not asking people to go out and purchase items or to, spend their own resources. We're just asking for help and coordination to make sure that our families have what they need. And that's a need that's going to continue, that we're going to continue to need support from our community to make happen. Also, if you go to volunteerwny.org, you'll find a whole list of all of the different remote volunteer opportunities that nonprofits are offering right now. United Way has posted a lot about them. There are definitely things out there, and there are still ways to make an impact. So if you're looking to volunteer right now, there are definitely things you can do. Don't let the lack of in-person opportunities discourage you.
Thanks, Sierra.
Yeah, and I'm once again going to echo a lot of what Sierra said. Even though a lot of places don't have in-person opportunities, I would still be reaching out now because there are places that are still willing to make opportunities work remotely. I know at Habitat, that's true of us as it is of Jewish Family Services. And a lot of organizations, once things start to ease up, are going to be not only resuming their programming, but resuming it at a greater need and a greater rate than they had previously. So just at Habitat, for example, we are going to be behind on our construction now, in part because we have not been able to start our build schedule, which was going to be starting at the start of this month. And our hope still is to maintain those same project timetables or come as close to that as possible. So we are probably going to be building more and doing it more per week than we otherwise would have. So we are doing a lot of work now to get that set up. So once we do resume, we can really hit the ground running. But I think also a lot of organizations still, like I said, they still have needs during this time. A lot of organizations have unfortunately had to make budget cuts or had to at least temporarily lay off or furlough staff. And they need help really kind of keeping a lot of the basic functions such as marketing, social media, PR, things like that going. And I would say just on the advocacy side as well, a lot of nonprofits are going to be facing potential budget shortfalls in the coming year, especially if there is not a resolution to a lot of these state budget crises. So I think that advocacy to try to lobby and write your local representatives and elect to try to advocate for that is a way you can make an impact. And also I'll say, if you are able to, also giving is one way as well, because the downstream effect of the COVID crisis is not only nonprofits facing funding shortages, but they're also going to be seeing decreases in annual giving, just because as unemployment rises and as people lose their jobs, planned giving is widely expected to drop off. And nonprofits also aren't able to do a lot of the fundraisers in person that they would normally be doing. So I think that's one way as well. If you were interested, that is another thing people can do. Again, it's not, but I think that figure out for yourself kind of what is the way that you think you yourself can give, and be that your time or through advocacy. And then I'd say reach out and let the nonprofits try to find out how to make that work. Since a lot of us, like I said, if we know what you're able to give and how you're able to help, we will find a way to make that work within the current situation.
Great. Thank you so much to both of you for taking the time to tell students a little bit more about the social issues that your organizations impact in our community, and for sharing your expertise and your experience with how to help students get involved and make an impact in your organizations and in the community. I really appreciate your time this afternoon.
Of course, and we really appreciate your time. Thank you for having us and for all you and your students do for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And just because I want to make sure everyone can connect with any of us today on this recording. So civic and community engagement, we are in South Wing 130. Our website address is right here on the screen, and we can also be reached at cce@buffalostate.edu if you have questions right now. And then Jewish Family Services, their website address is jfsbuffalo.org. They have a lot of really good information, and their contact information is on there as well. And the Niagara Area Habitat for Humanity at niagarahabitat.org. So thank you again to Sierra and Marco, and for Student Leadership and Engagement for hosting us today.